This is Kelly Hill, editor for Test and Measurement with RCR Wireless News. On this week's episode of Carrier Wrap, we talk with Paul Carter, CEO of benchmarking company Global Wireless Solutions. We'll get to that interview right after this. Thanks for joining me for Carrier Wrap. So benchmark testing and which network performs best is always a point of contention among wireless carriers. Just for one example, we recently had a spat between T-Mobile US and Verizon over the results of some network testing and their quote-unquote integrity that boiled down in part to their differing perspectives on the relevance of crowdsourced data versus drive testing data. Paul Carter is the CEO of benchmark testing company Global Wireless Solutions, or GWS, and I spoke with him about his perspective on that debate within testing, as well as how network testing is likely to evolve in a 5G world where wireless networks aren't just connecting people watching YouTube videos on their smartphones, they're connecting millions of IoT devices where metrics like throughput may or may not be reflective of what the devices actually need for good service. So here's that interview. So I'm here with Paul Carter of GWS. How you doing, Paul?
Thanks. Nice to see you.
Good to talk with you. Good to talk with you. So let's talk a little bit about 5G and the implications for network test. Now, you guys do benchmarking, and so what do you think are the implications of how benchmarking and field testing will have to evolve when it comes to a 5G world eventually?
Okay. Well, the thing is, right now there's a lot of talk in the media about 5G, about connected cars, autonomous cars, IoT, and the future of wireless networks. And I think that clearly there's no doubt about it when you look at where we've come over the last 15 years in the industry in terms of reliabilities of the networks increasing and the throughputs increasing. We've come a long way, but what's just around the corner, I think, is a whole new challenge for all of us and for the industry as a whole. And for so many other players in the industry, or so many other players that are about to join our industry, that are out there figuring out how to connect cars and what that means and how they need to take advantage of the wireless networks. So again, as you know, people are talking about 5G as if it's sort of here already, and of course there are still steps to be taken for ratification of standards and so on. And there are, of course, evolution paths, and there are many of those, and when you factor in IoT and its capabilities and its requirements, it's somewhat different to the sort of traditional speeds and the use cases of what we expect from 5G in terms of the throughputs and the low latencies. But of course, all of these networks, as they evolve over the next 3 to 5 years, will be a combination of networks. They won't just be a 5G network. The networks that exist today will continue, and in fact, 5G in many ways is an evolution of LTE anyhow, which is 4G. The peak, I would understand, the peak subscribers for 3G isn't likely to happen until 2020 or something, by some estimates. So for sure, these networks over the next few years will continue to evolve just like they have over the previous many years. And so from our perspective, testing these networks will continue to evolve in the same way that we've been evolving over the last 20 years. We've been testing wireless networks for 20 years, and historically that would be done testing the voice network only. Then data was added, and of course over the last, goodness knows, we've gone from GPRS to Edge to UMTS to HSPA, HSPA Plus, dual carrier HSPA, LTE, now carrier aggregation on LTE, and we're going to go to 5G. And in each case, on the data side, we used to start with data sticks in our test vehicles as we drove around. Nowadays, we pretty much exclusively test, right now at least, with smartphones, both on the voice and the data side. Obviously, that will continue as we move forward. But the services that we test perhaps evolve as well. So it's not just a throughput test or a ping. It's trying to understand how other services that we rely on and consumers rely on will need to be tested as well. Voice and other apps on the devices. Then there's the where we test as well. We currently, in the US in particular, we drive hundreds of markets across the US multiple times a year to collect data, so that we can get statistics across a whole city and then the whole country. That's still likely to continue, but at the same time, these services, 5G and IoT, the devices will be used in other places other than on street and in car, which they are already, but they will continue to be. And so we will continue to have to test in more places. We've already gone public with a lot of other testing in other places, whether it be stadiums or shopping centers or the subway, New York subway, or even the inauguration where we tested with our app One Measure, where we went around and we had teams of people collecting during, and after the inauguration to evaluate the wireless network performance there. This will continue. We'll continue to have to test with apps. With IoT, we're going to have to, it's going to be a slightly different story, because the devices are changing. They're not going to be just smartphones, and they're going to be small and sensors, and part of the requirement will be to have low power consumption. So perhaps we'll need to add in metrics to measure the power consumption as well. But fundamentally, whatever the device, whatever the network, whatever the service, you need robust, reliable, consistent performance. So we'll continue to have to evolve what we do to be able to measure and improve that.
Okay. And then what about, one of the things that I've heard come up lately, and I think this came up on a recent call with Verizon executives, was, the difference between crowdsourced data and sort of, the traditional measurement techniques that they're, mostly smartphone or device-based. Some folks who kind of do a combination of the two, you mentioned your app, that does have, device-based metrics. What are your thoughts on, on that sort of debate that's going on now in terms of, well, we say we have the best network, and then somebody else says, okay, but what data are you using?
It's an interesting debate for sure. I mean, obviously, it's quite easy to develop an app to measure network performance, and it's quite easy to deploy that, through, available the App Store or Google Play or whatever, and have people download and then use your app, or running an agent in the background on somebody else's app, whether it be Angry Birds, it's got an agent in the background to measure your speed or whatever as well. I mean, who knows? The way we look at it is that, crowdsourced information is very, very interesting to understand the heartbeat of the network, to understand that maybe last month the average was this, but this month the average of something is that. That's certainly interesting. And if a network operator deploys a software load that's just bad, and they could quickly see, overnight almost, a sort of a change in performance, and you can see that through crowdsourced information. But the methodologies for crowdsourced are quite varied across the different providers of this information. It's perceived or believed, because it's on customers' devices, it's perceived that it gets you closer to the customer, and it therefore represents the customer experience better. I don't agree with that. I think it certainly gets you information from the customer, but of course that customer, you have no idea what rate plan they have. You have no idea. You may not know the firmware version of the phone. You may not know that person dropped his phone down the toilet yesterday and it's been suffering ever since. There are just, it may be that phone, for whatever reason, has locked onto a site that it shouldn't be served by right now. And it's been on that, and the person using hasn't moved for a long time, and it's just stuck on that site. I mean, it could be that he's got 1,000 open apps on his phone that's causing some sort of degradation right now. You don't know any of that stuff. And matter of fact, the sort of, from a crowdsource, the number of parameters that you do get are very, very limited. Because oftentimes you don't want to impede the person's plan. You don't want to be sending a lot of data and so on. So the information is quite basic. And the thing is, from our perspective, our customers always want actionable information. They always want justifiable information. Particularly if they're making a nationwide claim or an important network performance claim, and there's a potential for them to be challenged. They need to be able to have rigorous collected data, rigorous analyzed data. We have been called into in front of court multiple times to have to defend the data that we collect by nationwide operators, because it's an important thing to make claims about. Just recently there've been a handful of reports that I've seen from different crowdsourced providers that say completely different results. For example, there's one that just came out this month in the UK, saying that the UK was, I think, 39th with an average 4G speed of about 23 meg. There's another provider just came out saying the UK is number one with an average across all networks of 26 meg. So it's just, you can't obviously go back and verify if they've got 500,000 data points. Who knows how or what was involved in that. So it's in my perspective, it's not actionable. It's just informational at best. Our customers want us to be able to give them information that can identify root cause problems on their network and can lead to a resolution on them. We've added the big data capability to our suite of tools this year, and we're coming up with some really interesting internal analysis that we're sharing with our customers about their network performance. And obviously, these networks, as I mentioned, all the technologies that exist currently in these networks, they're very, very complicated places. And when we drop our call, we kind of blame our operator, and we always think that they should know better and they should do a better job. But of course, there are all sorts of issues that they're contending with. And so through big data, you can start to sort of, as we call it, peel the onion and take one layer off after another to sort of get to the root of some of these problems, which are, of course, non-trivial. And, if we were just analyzing this data ourselves, we wouldn't be able to get there. But through big data, it can try lots of different, angles and lots of different analyses and get to the bottom of some of this stuff. So we're a big believer in rigorous data collection, analysis, and reporting. Whether we do that with this commercial test equipment in vans driving around, or whether we use our own app that we've developed at One Measure, to some degree, that doesn't matter. But the point is, you need to be able to understand what it is you're collecting, and you need to be able to stand behind it, and you need to get enough parameters. For example, with our app, we get about 150 network level parameters. So it's not quite the same as the network level layer 3 that we get with our commercial test equipment, but it is a lot more than throughput and maybe signal strength. So yeah, it's a shame right now. I think that that this debate is raging, and it's a shame that the way that the data is presented, in my opinion, is misrepresenting the network performance as well. Because ultimately, customers want, robust, reliable, consistent performance. They want to be able to use their phones to get their services when they want, where they want. And a lot of this, particularly on the crowdsourced results, a lot of it is presented as just the fastest network is the best, and that's a sort of, and the fastest is always best, which is not, it's not correct. Obviously, that might be the case in a Formula One race, but it's certainly not the case when it comes to how you use your cell phone, your smartphone. If you want to make a call to somebody, you want to be able to hear that person, and you want to be able to communicate with that person. If you want to stream video, you want to be able to see that video, and you want to be able to hear that video. So fastest does not always give you a better performance, and also this, sometimes the fastest average is also misleading as well, because it could be that dependent on the way the networks are deployed, it can have a peak high and a peak low. So their average is still good, but the inconsistency of the performance is what people get frustrated with. So all of that you have to be able to measure and understand.
So, one final question in terms of how things are looking to evolve in terms of 5G. One of the things I think is really interesting is the increasing use of let's test the performance on a specific app, whether that's YouTube, whether that's Facebook, that sort of user experience testing that, that I think has really evolved over the last, 3, maybe 4 years. As people say, okay, I don't just want to look at throughput, I want to look at performance of, how often is my video stopping, and then really look at, how people are experiencing applications, because that's where they spend most of their time. So is it going to be fairly easy? I think 5G use cases are maybe not necessarily, we don't know what the iPhone for 5G, that killer app that makes everybody jump onto 5G and really buy into it, is going to be yet. Do you think it'll be fairly easy to switch to, switch benchmarking to, whatever new app, as new apps come along, to do that, or is that going to be kind of, something that requires a little bit of nitty gritty integration to do?
Nothing's ever easy, Kelly. That goes without saying. But we definitely will be doing it. Obviously, of course, we don't quite know the future, but we do suspect and estimate that the video will continue to grow. The use of video, the use of social media, all of these services that people are currently using their phones for today, the percentage of both social media and video compared to 3-5 years ago is dramatically different, obviously, and they're likely to continue. Obviously, with things like AT&T owning DirecTV as well, and DirecTV Now is a service. You don't need a TV box anymore. You can just rely on your smartphone to deliver the streaming live TV. So understanding how these services perform is very, very important, and being able to test that and being able to understand how live TV where we may not have buffering versus content like Netflix, where they have limited content. I mean, they have a lot of shows, but they're limited compared to, say, YouTube. The way they choose their buffering, their resolution, all of that. YouTube, Netflix, DirecTV, all of these do things differently. And based on the buffering, if you have 10 or 20 or 30 seconds of buffering in a video, you may not notice a network failure anymore, because you just completely missed it altogether. The network dipped and then came back up again, but you had enough buffered data content that you didn't even see it. So testing all of that and testing it in a meaningful way and representing the user experience is non-trivial, but it's all being done. We're working in all of those, and the same thing for social media apps, Facebook and Instagram, all the rest of it. They have APIs that you can use to measure the performance. And it gets more and more complicated. It's how does this network, how do each of them perform on different technologies? How do they perform on these different services perform on different technologies for different operators on different devices? And there may be a different mix of, Facebook is better on this technology versus that technology, or this operator versus that operator. And so then the operators then need to go back and figure out how to, optimize their networks to sort of improve this performance. But this again goes back to this fundamental point that I was raising earlier, that it's not about the fastest. If things like Facebook and Twitter is another thing. I mean, obviously Twitter uses very limited bandwidth, so it's not about speed, but again, it's about reliability. So yeah, we have to be able to test all of those things, and we are doing so. And we have to be able to best represent the user experience. And I think that is the key point, that especially from our perspective, we can measure the network using a device, but we need to translate that to how users use the network. Some folks have apps where they focus their app on understanding this from an app perspective, to see percentage of time or percentage of data used for these different services and so on. And that's all interesting. But again, what's most important to you? I mean, if it's video consumes a lot of data, a lot of your time. But if Twitter's more important to you, Twitter doesn't use a lot of data or a lot of time. So Twitter could be more important to you than video, but it could appear that you're more interested in video because your throughput you use a lot more data and a lot more time on video. So this is where I think over the next few years, that's going to be the key for all of us, and particularly representing network performance, is to truly understand how to represent the customer experience the best. And as that evolves from whatever we're currently familiar with to what we will be familiar with, we'll have to try and adapt to that as well.
Okay. Great. Well, Paul, thanks so much for the time today. Really appreciate your perspective. So that wraps up today's episode. Thanks for joining me for Carrier Wrap. On our next episode, we're going to catch up with the Competitive Carrier Association about upcoming policy issues in Washington. Don't want to miss that. See you next time.